story here that more Republican lawmakers in Columbia, South Carolina. There were two South Carolina lawmakers who want to build a monument at the State House to honor, and this is, you can imagine what is really motivating this. Maybe I'm being a little cynical. They want to honor black Confederate veterans. The only problem with this bill, sponsored by Republican Bill Chumley of Woodruff,
fucking idea,
and Representative Mike Burns of Taylor's, they want to create this commission to establish a monument to honor black Confederate veterans. I guess this is their clever way of trying to justify other Confederate statues. The only problem with that plan is that, according to Walter Edgar, a historian, in all my years of research, I can say I have seen no documentation of black South Carolina soldiers fighting for the Confederacy. In fact, when secession came, the state turned down free blacks who wanted to volunteer because they didn't want armed persons of color. Any African American who served in a Confederate Union in South Carolina was either a slave or an unpaid laborer working against his will, Edgar said. That is another way of saying slave. But Chumley and Burns were in no way, disappointed. They said, "We are all learning a lot. The purpose of the bill is education."
It's very Schoolhouse Rock.
Yes. So we had to file that bill to find out that it was about nothing. So there you have it.
Yeah, but these are guys. These are the max boot people. They're going to end up by the end of the congressional term. They're like, you know what? We really need to do something about the new Jim Crow.
It's unbelievable.
I had no idea.
I don't think these guys are going to make it that far.
I don't think so. Maybe they'll make it far. Whether they make it far enough to be like, yeah, I guess slavery was kind of rough. Sure.
You know, as Dave Rubin says, let's go to calling from a 519 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Chris from Ontario.
Hello, Chris. What's on your mind?
It's the Civil War again. You guys mentioned black Confederates.
Yes.
And that rather ridiculous proposal to make a monument to black Confederates. I apologize, by the way. My voice is a bit scratchy. I'm getting over a cold. It's actually a really interesting topic, the whole black Confederate thing. So, if you guys don't mind, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about it a little bit.
Sure, please.
Basically, this whole black Confederate thing isn't really as new as you might think. You guys are talking about these two fellows proposing it, just thinking they existed. But the historiography of the black Confederate myth is really kind of part of a larger story about the mythology of the Civil War, which basically traces back to this mythology that black people were in support of the Confederate movement, that black people were basically in support of their own oppression and active agents in favor of it. But the idea of them being soldiers is a new idea that kind of comes in response to the popularization of black Union soldiers by programs such as Glory, which popularized the story of black men who fought for the Union. The actual Confederates themselves would have found the notion ludicrous. In fact, throughout the war, they did debate the issue of raising black soldiers to supplement their forces and to gain diplomatic points across Europe. But it was exceptionally controversial because, of course, the idea of a black man being a soldier would legitimize black people as men, which would mean they're people, which would mean you can't hold them as slaves.
Right.
In fact, Howell Cobb went so far to say during a secret session of Congress on the issue in 1864, November 64, when the Confederacy was getting desperate for more men and to look like they weren't entirely a pro-slavery rebellion in the face of Europe, Cobb goes so far to say, he's a Georgian senator / soldier, if slaves make good soldiers, then our entire theory, and therefore the entire revolution, is wrong. So to many Confederates, they would prefer to lose the war. But there is enough popular support for it that by the very end of the war, there is about 2 company of black Confederate soldiers raised in Virginia, in Richmond. Virginia was the only state to pass any kind of bill allowing this to happen. because the Confederate Congress in early 65 did authorize state raising of black troops. These men were not black patriotic volunteers. Most of them were slaves from Confederate ironworks. They were being forced at gunpoint to do this, and they never saw any action. There are limited examples of black soldiers trying to enlist. In 62, in the Baton Rouge, New Orleans area in Louisiana, where there was actually a significant affluent black population, some of whom were actual slave owners, these men did try to form a regiment of Confederate volunteers, the Louisiana Native Guard. And the governor of Louisiana actually did authorize them a colonel. But as soon as the Confederate government learned of this in 62, they immediately turned it down, and the governor actually advised them to hide their uniforms and their guns before regular Confederate troops arrived.
You know what's interesting about this dynamic, though, is, of course, like neo-Confederates and libertarians, and often we're talking about the same thing. Their biggest argument about why you don't need a something like the Civil Rights Act is because what deranged person who owns a business would think that they could stay in business and still be racist? Where you've just shown an example of people who are willing to lose a war to maintain their racial bigotry.
Yeah, exactly. And because the entire social stratum depended upon that bigotry. So if the Confederates had sacrificed slavery, they sacrificed the whole point of the revolution. So, if you have like one of these, in the pre-Civil Rights Act America, letting black people go to your business is not going to help business. Right. It would annihilate it in the same way that risking the end of slavery would defeat the purpose of the Confederacy. But where it comes in memory, which is really interesting, is where what happens is after the war, black people were portrayed as being supporters of the Confederacy as slaves, right? That as slaves, they happily supported their masters in their master struggle for the creation of a nation founded upon what Alexander Stevens would call the best master-slave relationship in the world, right? It's not until the 1980s that the neo-Confederates do an about-face and start talking about the United Peoples of Color who fought for the Confederacy, right? But it's all getting back to the same pattern, where Confederate mythology appropriates black bodies and black memory and uses that in favor of their own oppression.
Right.
Right? Which is part of a broader issue with American racial memory and racial history, where oppressed peoples are recast as being in favor of their oppression. And that's the crazy part. And it's gone to such an extreme now that you have some ludicrous people arguing there were 50,000 black soldiers in Lee's army, which is a joke. There wasn't a single black soldier in Lee's army.
Well, and here's the thing, is that those stories become more believable the further out you go from time, right? I mean, that's the less informed. I mean, look, you had two South Carolinian lawmakers who proposed this and basically admitted, we didn't realize, we had no idea what we were talking about. But we went as far as proposing it as a law. We were so convinced that it was real. They didn't even ask. Who did they ask? It's pretty amazing. Well, it's fascinating stuff. One more point. Go ahead.
Just that, it gets so ubiquitous that the National Park Service even made this mistake once, where they referenced in the pamphlet thousands of black soldiers in the Confederacy, which is ridiculous. But just one last point that's interesting to kind of think in contrast to this, where you have all this myth-making about black people in support of the Confederacy and supporting their own oppression. What people don't talk about were the 10,000 or so black men with the Confederate Army that were slaves. And their service as slaves freed every white man of that army hors de combat. So it was a critical service. They were, providing by point of rifle and bayonet. They didn't have a choice. That doesn't get talked about. The actual service that was forcibly and coercively given by black men to the Confederate movement, that's not talked about. But instead, this fictionalized version where they're supporters and they're voluntary patriots is invented to appropriate their memories to support their own oppression. And I think you see that in other areas of American culture too, but the Civil War is a good example of it.
Well, I appreciate the call. And to be fair, it's the least they could do for all the free housing they had and free food.
That guy's a scholar, and he said that they were totally into helping with the Civil War with the Confederates. Unbelievable. That's what I took from all of what you just said.
All right, get a jump, but I appreciate the call.
Big fans.
Really appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
League fans. I do want to hear what Greg has to say about that. Psych.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos